Hello, friends, and welcome to today's discussion on the topic Good Clinical Practice. It is a guideline that is published by the ICH, International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceutical Products for Human Use. So, it is E6R2, the current Step 4 version, which is dated November 9, 2016. So first of all, why was it required to have a GCP, good clinical practice regulations to be published, and that too with the cooperation of all the countries? Was uh, because of the incident of the thalidomide that happened in 1961, wherein 2,000 children had died and 10,000 children were seriously disabled. So then government authorities were required to take action and to make regulatory arrangements to oversee the testing of every new medicine that was being licensed and approved for marketing. In 1964, the World Medical Association developed, and indeed it continues to review and adapt, the Declaration of Helsinki as a guide for performing research in human beings. So, what is good clinical practice? The guidelines lay down, they are not very specific about how to design a protocol or how to carry out or conduct a study and how to report a study. However, they actually lay down the silent features of a particular clinical trial. So, the clinical trial is designing of a protocol, followed by conducting of the clinical trials, monitoring of the clinical trials, thereafter recording of the clinical trial, recording of all the data generated during the clinical trials, the data analysis of all the data that is generated, and then the data is reported. This is an overview of clinical trials. Declaration of Helsinki lays down the guidelines. So all the ethical principles that have their origin in Declaration of Helsinki has to be followed. Uh, The clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with the ethical principles that have their origin in Declaration of Helsinki, and they should be consistent with good clinical practice. Clinical trials should be conducted in accordance with ethical principles that have their origin in Declaration of Helsinki. The risks and inconvenience should be weighed against the anticipated benefit for the trial subject and society. The rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subject should prevail over the interests of the science and society. The available non-clinical and clinical information on an investigational product should be adequate to support the proposed clinical trial. And the clinical trial should be scientifically sound and described in a clear detail in the protocol. The trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received prior institutional review board independent ethic committee approval or a favorable opinion. The medical care given to subjects should always be the responsibility of a qualified physician or, when appropriate, by a qualified dentist. Each individual involved in conducting a trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective tasks. Freely given informed consent should be obtained from every subject prior to clinical trial participation. All clinical trial information should be recorded, handled, and stored in a way that follows its accurate reporting, interpretation, and verification. Other principles of ICH GCP is the confidentiality of records that could identify the subjects should be protected, respecting the privacy and confidentiality rules in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements. The investigational product should be manufactured, handled, and stored in accordance with the applicable good manufacturing practice. Systems with procedures that assure the quality of every aspect of the trial should be implemented. So first of all, a protocol is prepared, and An investigator's brochure is given to the investigator. So what is the content of the brochure? Let's see. The investigator's brochure is a compilation of clinical and non-clinical data on the investigational product that are relevant to the study of the products in human subjects. Its purpose is to provide the investigators with the information to facilitate their understanding of the rationale for the study and compliance with key features of the protocol such as dose frequency interval, methods of administration, and safety monitoring procedures. The investigator's brochure also provides insight to support the clinical management of the study subjects during the clinical trial. Other content, it should include the physical, chemical, pharmaceutical, pharmacological, toxicological, pharmacokinetic, metabolic, and clinical information that is available on the new chemical entity or the new biological entity. Then chemical name and the generic and trade names when approved of the investigational products, all active ingredients, the investigational products, pharmacological class, and its expected position within the class, that is advantages, the rationale for performing the research with the investigational products, and the anticipated prophylactic, therapeutic, or diagnostic indications. Physical, chemical, and pharmaceutical properties and formulations. Description of the formulations to be used, including excipients and justification if clinically relevant. For example, a modified release dosage form would be expected to uh, impact the release of the drug profile, or any excipient for that matter which is used in any formulation which is expected to impact the dissolution and hence bioavailability should be studied, it should be elaborated. All pharmaceutical properties should be elaborated. Instructions for storage and handling of the dosage forms. Any structural similarities with other known compounds. The non-clinical studies should elaborate the species that have been tested, number and the sex of animals in each group, unit dose, example milligram, kilogram, dose interval, route of administration and duration of dose, information on systemic distribution, duration of post-exposure follow-up. The results, including the following, should also be summed up, and a summary should be presented in the brochure, that is the nature and the frequency of pharmacological or toxicological effects, severity or intensity of pharmacological or toxic effects, time to onset of effects and duration of effects, reversibility of effects, and dose response. Investigators' qualification and agreements. The investigator should be qualified by education, training, and experience to assume responsibility for the proper conduct of the trial and should meet all the qualifications specified by the regulatory requirements. The investigator should be thoroughly familiar with the appropriate use of investigational products as described in the protocol in the current investigator's brochures, in the product information, and in other information sources provided by the sponsor. The investigator should be aware of and should comply with the good clinical practice and applicable regulatory requirements. The investigator institution should permit monitoring and auditing by sponsor and inspection by the appropriate regulatory authorities. The investigator should maintain a list of appropriately qualified persons to whom the investigator has delegated significant trial related duties. Before initiating a clinical trial, informed consent should be taken from all the subjects. In obtaining and documenting informed consent, the investigator should comply with the applicable regulatory requirements and should adhere to good clinical practice and to the ethical principles that have their origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. The written informed consent form provided to the subjects should be revised wherever important new information becomes available that may be relevant to the subject's consent. Neither the investigator nor the trial staff should coerce or unduly influence a subject to participate or to continue to participate in a trial. The safety reporting. All the serious adverse events should be reported immediately to the sponsor. The immediate reports should be followed promptly by detailed written reports. The final reports by the investigator. Upon completion of the trial, the investigator should inform the institution. The investigator institution should provide the IRB and IEC, uh, Institutional Review Board, Institutional Ethics Committee, with a summary of the trial outcome, and the regulatory authorities with any report required. Trial management, data handling, and record keeping. The sponsor should utilize appropriately qualified individuals to supervise the overall conduct of the trial, handle the data, verify the data, to conduct the statistical analysis, and to prepare the trial reports. The sponsor may consider establishing an independent data monitoring committee to assess the progress of a clinical trial, including the safety data and the critical efficacy endpoints at the intervals, and to recommend to the sponsor wherever to continue, modify, or stop a trial. IDMC should have written operating procedures and maintained within the records of all its meetings. When using electronic data handling and/or remote electronic trial data systems, the sponsor should ensure a document that the electronic data processing system conforms to the sponsor's established requirements for completeness, accuracy, reliability, and consistent intended performance. Essential documents for the conduct of a clinical trial. The various documents are grouped in three sections according to the stage of the trial during which they will normally be generated, that is, before the clinical phase of the trial commences, during the clinical conduct of the trial, after completion or termination of the trial. A description is given of the purpose of each document and whether it should be filed in either the investigator or institution or sponsor files or both. Before the clinical phase of the trial commences, investigator brochure should be available. The purpose, the document, the relevant and current scientific information about this investigational product has been provided to the investigator. It should be present both with the investigator institution as well as the sponsor or the company which conducts the clinical trial and interested in the marketing authorization. The signed protocol and amendments, if any, and sample case report form. The document, investigator and sponsor agreement to the protocol amendments and CRF should be present both with the investigator and sponsor. Information given to the trial subject, informed consent form, including all applicable translations. To document the informed consent should be present both in with the investigator and sponsor. Any other written information that subjects will be given appropriate written information to support their ability to give fully informed consent should be filed both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Advertisement for subject recruitment to document that the recruitment measures are appropriate and not coercive should be available with the investigator. Financial aspects of the trial to document the financial agreements between the investigator institution and the sponsor for the trial should be available both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Insurance statement to document that compensation to subjects for trial related injury will be available should be available both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. The signed agreements between the involved parties, example, investigator, institution and sponsor, investigator, institution and CRO, sponsor and CRO, investigator, institution and authorities. All these agreements should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Before the clinical phase of the clinical trial commences, documented approval, favorable opinion of the IRB or IEC, the along with any amendments in the protocol, CRF, informed consent, any other written information that needs to be provided to the subjects, advertisement for the subject recruitment if used because they should not be coerced, so it should be advertisement. Subject compensation, if any other documents given for a given approval, favorable opinion. The purpose is the to document that the trial has been subject to IRB/IRC review and given favorable opinion, to identify the version number and date of the documents that needs to be filed both at the institution as well as the sponsor. Institution Review Board Independent Ethics Committee composition, it needs to be uh, both documented both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Regulatory authorities, authorization, approval, notification of the protocol, to document appropriate authorization, approval, notification by the regulatory authorities has been obtained prior to initiation of the trial in compliance with the applicable regulatory requirements. Wherever required, should be located in the files of investigator as well as the sponsor. Curriculum vitae and other relevant documents evidencing the qualification of the investigator and sub-investigators should be available both with the sponsor as well as the institution. Normal values range for medical, laboratory, technical procedures and/or tests included in the protocol. To document the normal values and/or ranges of the tests should be present both with the investigation, gator institution as well as the sponsor. Medical or laboratory or technical procedure tests, certification, accreditation, for example, the labs have to be NABL accredited or any other, for example, in the industry, it is expected that NVISA Brazil, US FDA or EU GMP, uh, any of the certification should be present. Established quality control and or external quality assessment or other validation where required, to document competence of facility to perform required tests, support reliability of results, should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Sample of the labels attached to the investigational product containers, to document compliance with the applicable labeling regulations and appropriateness of instructions provided to the subject should be present with the sponsor. Instructions for handling of investigational products and trial-related materials, to document instructions needed to ensure proper storage, packaging, dispensing, and disposition of investigational products and trial-related materials. Should be present both with the investigator institution, and the sponsor. Shipping records for investigational products and trial-related materials, to document shipment details, batch numbers, and methods of shipments of investigation products and trial-related materials, allows tracking of the product batch, review of shipping conditions, and accountability should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Certificate of analysis of investigational product that has been shipped, very important, it should be present to document identity, purity, strength of investigational products to be used in the trial should be present with the sponsor. Decoding procedures for blinded trials, to document how, in case of emergency, identity of blinded investigation products can be revealed without breaking the blind for the remaining subjects' treatment, should be present with the investigator and the sponsor. And if any CRO is involved, CRO also. Master randomization list, to document methods for randomization of the trial population. It should be present with the sponsor. Pre-trial monitoring report, to document that the site is suitable for the trial, may be combined with 8.2.20, that is trial initiating monitoring report. They have to be present with the sponsor as well as the investigator. Now, those were the documents that needed to be filed with both investigator or the sponsor or the CRO before the initiation of the clinical trials. So now we will see what are the documents that needs to be present with the investigator, institution, and the sponsor during the conduct of the clinical trial. Investigators' brochures, updates, the document that investigator is informed in a timely manner of the relevant information as it becomes available, should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Any revision to the protocol amendments and CRF informed consent form Any other written information provided to the subjects, advertisements for subjects recruitment, to document the revisions of these trials related to the documents that take effect during the trial should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Dated documented approval, favorable opinion of the IRB or IEC of the following protocol amendments, revisions of informed consent form, any other written information to be provided to the subject, advertisement for the subject recruitment, any other documents given, favorable opinion, continuing review of the trial. Why? What is the purpose of having this document at both investigator and the sponsor is to document that the amendment or revisions have been subject to IRB or IEC review and were given favorable opinion to identify the version number and the date of the document. Regulatory authorities, authorizations, approvals, notifications were required for protocol amendment and other documents to document compliance with applicable regulatory requirements. Wherever required, should be present with the investigator institutions and the sponsor. Curriculum vitae for new investigators and or sub-investigators should be present both at the investigator as well as the sponsor. Updates to normal values, ranges for medical laboratory technical procedures included in the protocol. To document normal values and ranges that are revised during the trial should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Updates of medical laboratory technical procedures, certifications or accreditations or established quality control and or external quality assessment or other validations which is documented that the test remains adequate throughout the trial period should be present both with investigator and the sponsor. Documentation of investigation product and trial related material shipment should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Certificates of analysis for new batches of investigational products should be present with the sponsor. Monitoring visit reports to document site visits by and finding of the monitor should be present with the sponsor. Relevant communications other than site visits, letters, meeting notes, notes of telephone calls to document any agreements or significant discussions regarding trial administration, protocol violations, trial conduct, adverse event reporting should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Signed informed consent forms to document that consent is obtained in accordance with the good clinical practices and protocol and the date and dated prior to participation of each subject in the trial. Also document direct access permission should be should be filed with the investigator. Source documents to document the existing of the subject and substantiate integrity of the trial data collected, to include original documents related to the trial, to medical treatment, and history of subject should be present with the investigator. Signed, dated, and completed case report forms to document that the investigator or authorized member of the investigator's staff confirms the observations recorded. Should be present in original with the sponsor, and a copy should be kept with the investigator. Documentation of CRF corrections. To document all changes, additions, or corrections made to the CRF after initial data were recorded. Original should be maintained with the sponsor and a copy with the investigator. Notification by originating investigator to sponsor of serious adverse events and related report should be present both with the sponsor as well as the investigator. Notification by sponsor and/or investigator where applicable to regulatory authorities and IRB/IEC of unexpected serious adverse reactions and of the other safety information. Notification by the sponsor and/or investigator where applicable to the regulatory authorities and IRB/IEC of unexpected serious adverse events reactions in accordance with 5.17 and 4.11 and other safety information in accordance with 5.16.2 and 4.11.2. should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Notification by sponsor to investigators of safety information should be present both by the investigator and both with the sponsor. Interim of or annual reports to IRB and IEC that needs to be submitted by the investigation institution. Interim or annual reports provided to the IRB or IEC in accordance with 4.10 and to the authorities in accordance with 5.17.3 should be filed both with sponsor and the investigator institutions. Subject screening log to document identification of subjects who entered the pre-trial screening should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Subject identified code list to document that investigator institution keeps a confidential list of names of subjects allocated to trial numbers or enrolling in the trial. Allows investigator to reveal identity of any subject should be present with the investigator. Subject enrollment log to document chronological enrollment of subjects by trial should be present within the investigator institution. Investigational products accountability at the site to document that investigation products have been used in according to the protocol should be present both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Signature sheet to document signatures and initials of all persons authorized to make entries or corrections on CRF to be present both with the investigator and the sponsor. Record of retained body fluids, tissue samples if any, to document location and identification of retained samples if assays need to be repeated should be present both with the investigator and the sponsor. Investigational products accountability at the site. Now this is after the completion or termination of the trial. The following documents need to be filed both at the investigator as well as the sponsor. That is accountability at the site to document that the investigational products have been used according to the protocol, to document the final accounting of investigational products received at the site, dispensed to the subject, returned by the subjects, and returned to the sponsor. Exact counting of the number of tablets or number of capsules or everything has to be maintained. Documentation of investigational product destruction. The remaining amount of the product should be destroyed. The document has to be located both in the files of investigator as well as the sponsor. Completed subject identification code list to permit identification of all subjects enrolled in the trial in case follow-up is required. The list should be kept in confidential manner and for agreed upon time. Should be located in the files of investigator institution. Audit certificate to document that audit was performed should be present with the sponsor. Final trial closeout monitoring report to document that all the activities required for the trial closeout are completed and copies of essential documents are held in the appropriate files. So this closeout monitoring report has to be present with the sponsor. Treatment allocation and decoding documentation returned to the sponsor to document any decoding that may have occurred should be present within the sponsor with the sponsor. Final report by investigator or to IRB or IEC where required and where applicable to the regulatory authorities to document completion of the trial should be present with the investigator. And clinical study report. Finally, the report needs to be prepared according to the good clinical practices and the document results and interpretation of the trial should be available both with the investigator as well as the sponsor. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the discussion. Thank you.